Many older folks wonder why they're still around, even when their bodies don't respond like they used to, and loneliness feels more present than any other company. Quite a few live years longer than they ever imagined, dealing with constant aches, physical limitations, and profound emotional losses. Time keeps ticking on, but the feeling of waiting lingers. Could there be a bigger reason for all this? Some say it's just a result of modern medicine, artificially prolonging life. But that explanation doesn't comfort the heart. For those who believe everything has a purpose, a more unsettling question arises. Could there be a spiritual meaning behind this extended life in old age? This question isn't new. For decades, students of the soul have tried to understand why some folks reach their 90s, even 100 years, even when they seem to have completed their earthly journey. Among these voices, one stood out strongly: Edgar Cayce, known for his insights into the soul and the purpose of existence. According to him, extreme longevity in some elderly people might be a sign of an unfulfilled mission or a lesson yet to be learned. And that changes everything. If this idea resonates with you, please consider subscribing to this channel and giving the video a thumbs up, because we're covering topics that truly matter to those seeking to understand life's mysteries in depth. Cayce said the soul doesn't remain embodied by chance. Each incarnation has specific goals, which vary according to individual growth. When these purposes aren't fully achieved, the time spent in the body can be extended. It's not a punishment, but an opportunity. For him, the prolonged suffering that many face in old age is, in some cases, a final chance for inner transformation, a final adjustment before the ultimate departure. Pain then ceases to be just something to endure and becomes a silent call, an invitation to reflection, to forgiveness, to accepting lessons that may have been avoided throughout a lifetime. In his readings, Cayce described various situations in which people remained alive for years, beyond what was expected, because there was something that still needed to be resolved. Sometimes it was a request for forgiveness that wasn't made. Other times, a need to develop patience, humility, or compassion. He stated that the soul knows this, even if the conscious mind doesn't realize it. That's why many older folks feel they're still waiting for something, even without knowing exactly what. It's as if the body is tired, but the soul is still watching over a half-open door, waiting for the right moment to cross over. This kind of explanation might seem strange to those who've never reflected on life from the soul's perspective. But for many elderly people who live with the weight of time, it brings comfort. It brings meaning. After all, simply living isn't enough. Cayce said that even the last days can contain the most meaningful moments of existence. Sometimes a single conversation, a gesture of reconciliation, or even a new silent understanding can complete the cycle of an entire life. What seemed like just suffering then transforms into a dignified period, full of purpose and significance. What's remarkable about Cayce's insights is that he didn't treat old age as an empty burden, but as a sacred stage. He saw each phase of life as an essential part of the soul's plan. In old age, he said, the veils begin to thin and the spirit begins to prepare for the return. At that moment, forgotten memories emerge, dormant feelings resurface, and consciousness turns inward. It's not uncommon for older folks to have vivid dreams, visions, or heightened sensitivity. All of this, according to Cayce, is part of a process of alignment between the soul and its greater spiritual journey. Some may think these spiritual signs are just side effects of age, but Cayce stated the opposite. He saw them as evidence that the inner world is opening up to more subtle dimensions. For him, the proximity of death isn't a dark end, but a transition to a higher stage of consciousness. Many elderly people report feeling presences, hearing soft voices, or reliving old memories with impressive clarity. Cayce explained that in these moments, the soul begins to communicate with higher levels of existence, preparing to release the body more consciously and serenely if its inner state allows it. Another important point in Cayce's revelations was the idea that pain, when faced with acceptance and surrender, can accelerate the soul's purification process. He didn't romanticize suffering, but saw it as a tool for awakening. Many elderly people who live long periods with physical limitations end up developing virtues they would never have cultivated in another phase of life. Patience, faith, humility, silence. All of this, according to Cayce, are valuable achievements that accompany the soul beyond death. That's why living long isn't necessarily a hardship, but can be a spiritual privilege that only some receive. Cayce also spoke about the importance of the emotional environment during old age. For him, the feelings surrounding the elderly person deeply affect their soul's state. Environments full of love, understanding, and sincere presence favor a smoother transition. On the other hand, loneliness, abandonment, and emotional coldness can trap the soul in states of anguish even before physical death. He suggested that family members not underestimate the importance of small gestures, simple conversations, attentive listening. Sometimes, an elderly person lives longer than expected, just waiting to be heard, waiting for a hug, forgiveness, a meaningful farewell. And there's also the question of spiritual lucidity. Cayce said that many elderly people develop, without realizing it, a wisdom that surpasses common knowledge. They gain profound insights about life, human nature, and God. This wisdom doesn't come from books, but from experience, pain, and the introspection that time imposes. That's why he encouraged younger people to listen attentively to older ones. The elderly person may not always be able to put into words what they feel, but they carry within them truths that only a mature soul can understand. And hearing these truths can even help them rest in peace. Many people wonder if there's a way to know when one's life mission has been fulfilled. Cayce replied that this certainty rarely comes rationally, but it can be felt. An elderly person at peace who accepts their own story without resentment is usually closer to the conclusion of their journey. This doesn't mean an absence of pain, but a feeling of deep acceptance. When there's no more internal resistance, the body tends to let go more easily. On the other hand, when there are unresolved conflicts, the soul may hesitate, even if the body is exhausted. That's why Cayce spoke so much about the importance of forgiveness, including forgiveness of oneself. He cautioned against a detail often forgotten. Living longer can also be a chance to serve. Many elderly people believe they're no longer useful, that their time to contribute has passed. Cayce saw this as a mistake. For him, any word of comfort, any loving presence, any simple gesture can have a profound impact on someone's life. A soul's mission isn't measured by the strength of the body, but by the inner willingness to continue loving, even in the midst of pain. Sometimes living longer is simply giving the heart time to do what pride, haste, or fear prevented for decades. In many of his accounts, Cayce cited examples of people who spent years bedridden or in silence, but who profoundly influenced the lives of family members simply with their presence. He believed that the soul, even when the body no longer reacts, remains active. A look, a tear, a simple gesture can carry profound messages for those who are attentive. This changes how we view extreme old age. It's not an error of nature, but a sacred space for the soul's expression. Often, those around are so impacted by the elderly person's experience that they begin to see life differently. And that impact is part of the mission. Another revealing aspect of Cayce's readings is the connection between choices made throughout life and the type of death a person faces. He said the soul constantly plants and harvests. If someone has spent their life avoiding emotional responsibilities, running from reconciliations, or denying important truths, they may find in the end of life a final chance to face these issues. Illness or limitation aren't punishments, but opportunities. Everything that was avoided tends to return with greater force in old age, precisely because the soul knows that time is running out. It's the moment of internal reckoning, where there's no longer any escaping oneself. For Cayce, old age is a kind of mirror of the soul. Everything that was built throughout life, the virtues and the blockages, the pains and the lessons learned, are reflected in this final phase. That's why he said, growing old is a sacred act, a privilege that allows the soul to integrate what it's lived and prepare to move forward with greater clarity. When an elderly person lives long and suffers a lot, they may be going through a deep healing process that only they, with their history and their journey, could carry out. Sometimes pain is the last teacher. Silence, the last prayer. And waiting, the necessary interval for true awakening. This understanding doesn't eliminate suffering, but gives it a new perspective. Many family members feel helpless in the face of the pain of those they love. But by understanding this process as part of something bigger, it's possible to offer presence with greater serenity. Cayce encouraged caregivers not to feel guilty for not being able to cure everything. He said that the most important thing is to be there. To be there with love, with listening, with patience. Often that's enough. The body suffers, but the soul feels the care. And when there's care, there's peace. That peace is the bridge that prepares the soul to follow its path with lightness, even when the body resists staying. Cayce also reminded us that physical pain and emotional suffering are different. An elderly person can have pain in their body, but be at peace with themselves. And the opposite is also true. He taught that emotional suffering is harder to heal, as it's linked to resentments, guilts, unaccepted losses. That's why he recommended that the elderly seek, whenever possible, to express what they feel, not to leave important words unsaid, to talk to their children, their grandchildren, their friends, to say what's been trapped for years. No matter the age, there's always time to open the heart and free what the soul carries in silence. In his final years, Cayce said a long life is a rare chance to align the heart with the soul. Even if the body doesn't keep up, consciousness can reach higher levels of understanding. Sometimes it's only in this final moment that a person understands the true value of what they've lived. The pain doesn't disappear, but it gains another meaning. Instead of being seen as injustice, it begins to be perceived as part of a deep learning. The soul recognizes what it needed to live, releases fear, and prepares to depart in peace. And when that happens, death ceases to be a feared end and transforms into a serene return. This vision profoundly transforms how we deal with the last years of life. If before it was common to see aging only as a decline, Cayce's revelations show that this period can be one of spiritual expansion. Even amidst limitations, there's room to evolve, understand, forgive, and above all, love with greater depth. There's no need to wait for an external miracle. The true miracle happens within, when the elderly person accepts their story and reconciles with it, when they look back without revolt, but with gratitude, when they see that everything had a meaning, even that which hurt. For those who accompany a loved one in this process, understanding this spiritual perspective can be liberating. Instead of asking why the pain doesn't pass, one can ask what still needs to be healed, what conversation hasn't happened yet, what hug is still waiting. Cayce said that the soul never says goodbye without leaving signs. The silence of an elderly person sometimes speaks more than any word. A lingering look, an unexpected tear, a subtle touch. These are the gestures that, for him, indicate that the soul is in motion. And when we recognize these signs, we can connect more deeply and truly. It's common that, in the last days, the elderly person demonstrates different behaviors. It may seem that they're saying disjointed things or reliving old memories. But for Cayce, this is a sign that the soul is crossing internal layers that need to be released. It's not confusion, it's cleansing, it's healing. And the more acceptance there is around, the smoother this crossing will be. Instead of correcting or controlling, he recommended welcoming, being together with patience and loving presence. Often, the simple act of holding a hand and listening attentively can help the elderly person release the weight they still carry. Cayce also pointed out that, for some, living many years is a way to leave a clearer spiritual mark for those who remain. A testimony of faith, of overcoming, of wisdom. The elderly person who continues to live may be fulfilling a silent but powerful role. They're like a flame lit in the middle of the night, reminding younger people that life has many meanings beyond the rush of everyday life, that there's time for everything, including changing, even at 90 years old, and that life only truly ends when the soul says goodbye in peace. Until then, there's always something to learn, to teach, and to transform. By understanding this forgotten spiritual explanation, we stop seeing the suffering of the elderly as something meaningless. We begin to see this phase as a bridge, as a moment of transition with depth and purpose. This doesn't mean denying the pain, but giving it a new place, a place of respect, of silence, and of presence. When we look at old age with this understanding, fear decreases and compassion increases, and with that we create more humane, more affectionate spaces where the soul can express itself freely until its last breath. If you know someone who's living this phase, or if you yourself feel that these words speak to you, know that you're not alone. The extra time that life gives can be a blessing in disguise, a call to look inward with greater clarity. Share this video with those who need to hear this. And if these reflections touched you in some way, please consider subscribing to the channel. Here we seek meaning, understanding, and light for each stage of existence, especially those that the world insists on forgetting, but that the soul never ignores.